Hello, brethren. I'm Robert Lomas, and thank you for inviting me to this third meeting of the Transoceanic Masonic Study Society. I'm going to talk to you about a matter that's very important to all of us at the moment. I want to talk about how Freemasonry is facing up to the new reality of a post-COVID-19 world. Let's start by thinking about how well was Freemasonry doing before the virus hit. Freemasonry had a problem even before this COVID-19 pandemic arrived to threaten so many senior brethren. It had a mismatch between its infrastructure, its age profile, and its sources of candidates. Many Freemasons were older people, and so were their friends who became candidates. The younger people joining were mainly children of these older Masons. The simple fact is that COVID systematically attacks older people and older men in particular. It puts the aging membership of Freemasonry at risk, and even before the pandemic, our elder brethren were dying out quicker than they were being replaced. Now we are the first generation in nearly 300 years of existence to be facing a rapid decline in membership, and our history has only ever taught us how to expand. Our rank system, our regional organisations, and our network of Masonic halls is all based on an historical expectation of growth, and we can no longer rely on things growing. Let me show you how the position of English Freemasonry has changed over the last 300 years, before this latest pandemic hit. There was a steady increase in membership until in 1981 a sharp downturn began. And this was before COVID hit. The possible causes of this decline are important. Our decline in membership occurred during a period of steady growth in the number of eligible individuals aged 21 or over. And we can see this here in this graph. This is a growth of the eligible male population over the same period of time. This mismatch shows that a change in attitude was taking place. Our problem was that the order was attracting a smaller proportion of the possible available candidates. And as you can see, we've got varying degrees of popularity. It started out with about one individual per thousand. It grew to a peak around the 1980s of almost 6.5 per thousand. This shows that the market penetration of Freemasonry in terms of male Masons per thousand males in the population of England from 1700 until 2006. The average over the whole of Freemasonry's public life in England has been about 3 Masons per thousand. But this figure is heavily weighted by the success of Freemasonry during the 20th century. It's also interesting to note that this index of popularity continued to increase during the last comparable pandemic, the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1920. A sudden upsurge of popularity began in 1841 and steadily grew to a peak in 1981. Since then, it's been falling back towards what appears to be its more normal level of about 2.4 Masons per thousand of the eligible population. During the period 1911 to 1981, the average market penetration was about 5.07 Masons per thousand eligible males. That's over double the historical equilibrium level. We put Freemasonry's historical problem in context. From 1700 until 1981, Freemasonry was an expanding organisation. What impact did this have on the membership of the new lodges created? Let's have a look. Between 1981 and 1991, a major change happened to Freemasonry. There was a slower percentage yearly increase in eligible males, and the market penetration ratio also fell from its peak of 6.41 to 5.7. This drop of 11% in market penetration was partly counteracted by an increase in population, but it still resulted in the first reduction in overall membership in the history of the order. The membership fell back by 8.4%, and the direct result was what can only be described as a churning of lodges. Despite an 8.4% decline in membership, 374 new lodges were formed. This suggests organisational pressure to create new lodges, which of course in a situation of declining membership results in multiple lodge membership and a way of increasing income for the central organisation, which was facing severe reductions in fee income. This way of encouraging growth is not a sustainable model during a pandemic. I have illustrated this by plotting a graph of the ratio of new members of Freemasonry to the number of new lodges formed to contain them. You would normally expect to see this as a positive ratio, indicating that as the order grew, it created new lodges to serve an expanding membership. And from 1701 to 1891, this was largely true, the only exception being around the time of the union of the ancients and the moderns, when many lodges were erased or combined into a new roll of lodges, and there was a lot of moving between them. During this period, a new lodge was formed for every 42 members who moved from erased lodges. But as Figure 1 showed us, there was little impact on the increasing number of individuals wishing to be made Masons. Only after 1981 can the true lunacy of lodge churning be seen. By 1991, a new lodge was being formed for every 65 members who left the order, either by death or resignation. Between 1991 and 2007, that figure had risen to a new lodge for every 492 members who left the order, and Freemasonry warranted 660 new lodges over that period. The rate of change in membership has been minus 42% in a period when the eligible population has increased by 3.8%. Yet new lodges were still being created. This continuing creation of lodges suggests an organisation which is in denial about the extent of its decline. But what does all this mean? By the late 1990s, the recruitment impact of the two world wars had died out of the system, and the surge of recruitment during the 1960s and 70s, which has resulted from the baby boomers who'd been drawn in by their fathers and uncles during the post-war period of austerity, were aging. Masonry was settling back to its historical popularity level of about 2.5 Masons per thousand eligible. One successful way of combating this trend was the creation and encouragement of university lodges. They've been a great success in bringing in young seekers after truth. But at a time when the universities are discouraging social interaction, there's no parties during Freshers Week, and moving towards online distance teaching, how can our physically based lodge meetings have the attraction they once did? I think that our decline has a long way yet to run, and the pandemic is speeding up the process. We need to realise that once we can start to meet again, Freemasonry will be a smaller organisation needing fewer lodges and fewer Masonic halls. If its infrastructure is to survive, it will need to adjust to fit its membership and funding levels. This implies fewer meeting places and more cooperation between lodges in sharing premises, which can also earn their keep as local commercial function halls. A much smaller hierarchy is all that will be needed to support this forcibly reduced organisation. Our failure to appeal to the present and next generation needs to be addressed. and ways of promoting the positive message of Freemasonry have to be developed. This will be a major challenge during and after a period when we have been unable to meet or initiate new Masons. Our present situation is unique in the history of the craft, and it demands a unique response. We are forced into individual solitude, and because of the invisible nature of the threat, we cannot meet without endangering our respected elder brethren. This period of necessary social distancing presents enormous, potentially existential threats to Freemasonry or to our lodges. Secret lodges have been held in prisoner of war camps, on battlefields, and in occupied territories, which has enabled us to come together and share our thoughts and hopes. Now, for the first time, we have been ordered, for our own good, that we should not meet. It is advice we will try to follow, to limit the spread of this pernicious virus and do our best to protect our older brethren. It's hard to fight back our natural impulse to offer the hand of friendship to a brother. Our meeting halls and our temples are dark, while we sit at home in worthy self-isolation for the good of the whole population. But we need to remember that it is a bond of regular meetings, shared rituals and mutual toasting, a casual fraternal camaraderie that normally keeps our companionship fresh. A decline in membership to what has historically been the normal proportion of the eligible population suggests that Freemasonry could survive in a smaller form. But this will offer fewer opportunities for elaborate systems of rank. Such a smaller, flatter organisation may not appeal to the current senior membership, who've become rulers of the craft during a time of endless growth and bounty. But until a vaccine is developed and it becomes safe for older members to attend meetings, many of these senior members may not want to attend physical meetings because of the risk to their and their families' health and survival. What's clear from this grim analysis is that unless corporate Freemasonry starts to plan for a graceful decline and a managed handover of responsibility to the younger COVID-resistant brethren, it could sleepwalk itself to a death by video meetings. If we want to transmit our order to the next generation, then we need to think how we pass on our philosophy when we cannot use our traditional methods of teaching and we cannot meet with many of the elder brethren who hold the most knowledge. We need to think about small local lodges meeting in hired rooms in pubs and restaurants, providing a format for meeting young, like-minded individuals who are interested in the social and spiritual rewards of Freemasonry. We can take heart from the insight that Freemasonry has been a great force for spiritual and social improvement when it has drawn from a smaller group within the population and encouraged people of all types to meet, learn from each other, and share ideas. Perhaps the idea of a small, select band keeping the message of the craft alive might be what we need to look at as a model for the future. We have had 3 months when all physical Masonic meetings have been banned, and we've been coasted on inherited social capital. This pandemic won't be put back in its box quickly, if at all. Some countries are slowly coming out of lockdown, but the reality we are all returning to is different from the one we left behind. Social distancing and legal sanctions for not wearing face masks is affecting all business and social relationships, and not for the better. Working from home is becoming a new aspiration, and the reduction in footfall that it causes in city office districts is closing sandwich shops and takeaways. It's also depriving young people of the opportunity to develop a corporate identity with their colleagues and from observing how to apply the values of their organisation. The idea of an apprenticeship used to be that the newcomer would sit alongside an experienced colleague to watch, learn and be guided. I remember it being referred to by my grandmother as sitting by Nellie. Freemasonry, with its system of apprentices, fellow crafts and craftmasters, is entirely based on this ancient idea on teaching, and that doesn't work in a socially distanced world. The future of Freemasonry is not going to be well served by a need to socially distance. Our fraternal organisation is based on close, friendly relationships. We're used to greeting each other as brothers, not as carriers of deadly infection. Our ceremonies are based on ritual performances which involve close physical contacts to guide our hoodwinked candidates, the giving and receiving of grips and tokens as we impart secrets, and the intimate embrace of our raising ceremony, and the lusty singing of our opening and closing odes as we process in closely spaced pairs around an often tiny temple. We are neither used to nor enthusiastic about meddling with the symbolism of our ancient ceremonies to maintain a minimum distance of 39 1/3 inches. That's 1 metre, by the way, despite our familiarity with a 24-inch gauge. I've looked at some of the attempts for adapting our ceremonies, and apart from a slight hope for a highly reduced passing ceremony, I remain unimpressed. Until we can do the job of initiation properly, then perhaps we should concentrate on keeping what we have alive so that we can restart properly, either when track and trace becomes effective or we develop an effective treatment or a vaccine which enables us to live with the virus. What would be the point of destroying the unique symbolic heritage of Freemasonic ritual in order to adapt to a new reality if we lost our insight into the nature of truth in the process? The unique selling point of our order is that we offer access to ancient traditional ways of learning about yourself, your relationship with others, and your relationship with the world you live in. Whilst relief can and should be practiced with due regard to social distancing, brotherly love and truth are intimate matters which require trust in, not fear of, each other's touch. We have little hope of resuming our traditional ways until we're free to enter a shop without a mask. While shopping remains a life-threatening activity with face mask wearing enforced by law, then Masonic ritual and festive boards will be seen as even more toxic. The new reality for Freemasonry is closed, empty Masonic halls, permitting only tightly regulated business meetings with highly restricted ritual, no ceremonies, no visitors, no festive boards, no socializing in the bar, and no catering facilities at all. There is a limit to how long our organisation can survive without traditional meetings, as we cannot initiate new candidates, pass entered apprentices to fellow crafts, raise fellow crafts to master masons, or install a new worshipful master and a new set of lodge officers for the coming season. Freemasonry was a progressive science, but it has become a static group which is losing members who are being called to the Grand Lodge above, resigning because they can no longer afford lodge fees, or simply finding other things to do with the copious amounts of spare time lockdown has given them. And there's no way to replace this remorselessly declining membership. Unless we address this problem, we will slowly fade away. The cement which binds our lodges together is the regular meetings of its members. For the first time ever in our long history, we are unable to meet. As a consequence of this, there's a real danger that lodges will crumble and fail. As we have no way to initiate new members, if we lose existing members, they cannot be replaced. The circumstances of the pandemic result in many younger members struggling with their livelihoods as they are furloughed on a reduced wage, made redundant, or have to work from home, with possible lower productivity reducing their income. Quite rightly, lodge fees are a luxury which will be quick to go if these members need that money to support their families. At the other end of the age spectrum, we also have many retired members who may have secure pensions, but now see little value in belonging to a lodge which they cannot visit and may never be able to visit in person again. Lodges may have to think about reducing fees to reflect the fact they cannot carry out their basic functions of providing a regular meeting and a social board for their older members. Unless Freemasonry can offer some value for its fees, then they will be thought of as unnecessary luxury spending by cash-strapped young Masons and a waste of money by housebound older Masons. Any brethren who are members of more than one lodge must be considering what benefit they get from multiple memberships when they can no longer exercise the pleasure of attending. This pernicious virus poses an existentialist threat to Freemasonry unless we do something. But what? There's no precedent for our present circumstances. The Book of Constitutions won't help us. Coming together, shaking hands, and joining hands to form an initiate's chain are now life-threatening activities. Even if lockdown is temporarily eased, we are still unlikely to be allowed to hold normal Masonic meetings. Any easing of restrictions and moves towards returning to being Freemasons is certainly a move in the right direction, but both we and our governments will be watching hospital admission figures and new case reports to see how far we can safely return to our traditional ways. With many areas only allowing 6 individuals to meet in public, and in some areas only if they are from no more than 2 households, we have little hope of returning to our past normality. If we cannot meet until adequate testing and contact tracing are set up, or a vaccine and suitable treatment emerges, then we might well be kept apart until well into next year. I hope this isn't the case, but I do think we should hope for the best and plan for the worst. And as a first step, we need to understand the extent of the problems within each separate lodge. I would suggest that each lodge creates a simple rolling risk analysis by collecting items of anonymous data from each member. These are the year of birth, which allows a rolling forecast of age profile to be created, rank, i.e., entered apprentice, fellow craft master, mason, or past master. This enables us to discover how many stranded apprentices and fellow crafts we have, and how many potential members under 70 who could officer a lodge. And finally, it'd be useful to know what other lodges each individuals belong to. If we cannot meet, then multiple lodge memberships are an unnecessary luxury and will be the first things to go. I suggest this review of risk is undertaken quickly, so lodges can think seriously about how to cope. Video meetings, podcasts, and newsletters help us keep in touch. But what we really need to think about are ways we can keep lodges together until we can safely meet and conduct some types of ceremonies. The simple truth is that unless the worshipful masses of lodges are helped to maintain morale and hold their lodges together under these unique conditions where meeting has become dangerous, then there will be no Freemasonry left to return to. Lodges cannot replace members they lose while meetings are suspended, and so will slowly die. When we entered this period of enforced isolation, I realized it would be easy for brethren to drift away. So I thought about simple positive actions lodges could take to help their members keep in touch and support one another. I will now outline my experiences so far. The week before lockdown started in England, I had made Masonic visits to 2 COVID hotspots, Exeter and York, and was due to visit a lodge in the remote Lancashire village of Kirby Lonsdale. I didn't want to risk infecting their brethren, so I arranged to conduct my lecture over Skype. The lodge was opened and called off while I spoke to the assembled brethren and then called back on to close once I had dropped the link. Over the next weekend, 2 other lodges I was planning to visit, White Hills in Leyland and Semper Fidelio Chapter in Cheshire, decided not to meet. The only option left to me was to adapt a technique I had first used for Thomas Leggett Lodge in Macclesfield when I had been unable to attend because of the snow-blocked roads. I'd recorded an audio version of my lecture which did not use visual aids and could be played over a loudspeaker in the lodge room, as if I was speaking from the lectern. I developed a technical process to create an MP3 file which was small enough to email, yet allowed me to speak for up to 25 minutes on that occasion. I created emailable size audio files for both intended lectures and emailed them to my smartphone. When they arrived, I clicked on the attachment and was pleasantly surprised when the talk played on my phone. This was an unexpected benefit, as I had assumed that when I created the files, they would probably be played from a laptop, but they worked perfectly well on a smartphone. I realized I had accidentally developed a personal delivery system for what I now call personal podcasts. My first podcast was produced to use as lectures in lodges I couldn't get to, and who didn't have projection facilities or technical members who could organize video links. My idea was simple: an email-sized MP3 file which could be emailed to the lodge secretary and then played over a simple speaker system to the lodge at the appropriate point. But to achieve the same security as an open lodge while we weren't meeting, the distribution of the podcasts had to be secure. I started with a basic rule that my podcasts were never to be streamed and were only to be distributed by email by the secretary, following an undertaking from the worshipful master that no members of the lodge will pass them on in any way whatsoever. Lodges that agreed to this condition are allowed to choose 1 podcast per month to distribute on the day of their normal meeting. The podcasts are intended to support the survival of the lodge, not to provide binge listening. OpenLodge.com have provided the distribution website, and I have created a library of podcasts and recruited a trusted team of facilitators to distribute them. Neither I nor any of the other podcast authors who have joined me make any charge for the service, and all the facilitators are unpaid volunteers. Neither does OpenLodge.com charge for its hosting services. This privacy rule serves 3 purposes. Firstly, it ensures the podcasts are delivered securely to each member. Secondly, the delivery system is asynchronous, so the lodge doesn't have to get everyone online before they can start. And thirdly, the members can keep the podcast on their phone to listen to again as often as they wish. I've had emails from brethren who tell me they've been re-listening to them on earphones whilst walking their dogs, travelling on a bus, or driving a car. With a view to investigating what's possible, I did an experiment in the form of a hybrid Masonic meeting, drawing on that very first virtual lodge lecture I had held in Kirby Lonsdale on Friday the 13th of March this year, and the experience I have had of speaking remotely to the Acacia Society in India. At the September meeting of Humber Lodge number 57, some of the members of the team who are behind the podcast initiative helped me run a radically different type of meeting to support the Master of Humber Lodge. Let me describe what we did. A lodge business meeting was held by 15 masked and socially distanced members of Humber Lodge, the maximum number who were allowed into Hull Masonic Hall. On the 14th of the 9th this year, that number was reduced to 6. They opened the lodge, carried out the necessary business, and then formally closed. Then they went down to the dining room, where they were forbidden to have a festive board or any refreshments, but could socially distance. A large screen had been set up, and the master then convened an online meeting via Teams for those brethren who were unable to attend, and their guests. This experimental hybrid lodge meeting was a mix of a physical business meeting to maintain the continuity of the lodge and a secure digitally tiled online meeting to deliver a lecture. The physically present brethren followed the normal Masonic dress code, so out of politeness did the video attendees. The online brethren and their guests were invited by email to the meeting by a Teams meeting controller, who checked the identity of each member before admitting them. The Teams meeting controller controlled all microphones and cameras, and only those actually speaking, i.e. the virtual master, the presenter and the questioner during the Q&A, had their sound activated. The virtual master directed and controlled the meeting by instructing the Teams meeting convener who was off-site. As the meeting was opened under tiled conditions, I was able to deliver in full my lecture, The Secrets of the Third Degree, showing slides whilst appearing in a small video window as I talked. After the lecture, I took questions under the chairmanship of the virtual master, with questioners digitally raising their hands to ask a question. When the virtual master invited them to speak, their mic and camera were activated by the Teams meeting convener. When the question and answer finished, the virtual master said a few words to the assembled brethren and the visitors before instructing the Teams meeting convener to close the meeting, at which point all virtual brethren were logged off simultaneously. The brethren in the hall went home, and the brethren at home returned to their normal activities. It lacked many features of a real meeting, but it did provide a richer evening for both physical and virtual brethren than would have been offered by a simple, restricted attendance, masked business meeting. We all enjoyed the return to formality which the meeting made possible. Even with a restriction to 6 physically present brethren, this hybrid format offers something of the ritual of Freemasonry would normally enjoy, whilst helping the lodge members keep in touch with their visitors. Even with the greater restriction of 6 members, this hybrid meeting structure is viable and offers the chance for a lodge to maintain its formal meetings while still providing some online Masonic amusement and enlightenment. Let me describe the 2 virtual officers who are needed and the protocol for running a hybrid lodge meeting. A hybrid meeting is a 3-part meeting, and it involves enough physically present brethren to fill all the offices of the lodge. This is to enable the business of opening, taking minutes, agenda, calling off, calling back on and formally closing to be carried out. We could be quorum for business meetings, but ceremonies may not be possible, as that would require at least 7 plus a candidate, which may not be legally allowed. With a restriction of 6, each of the attending officers would need to act in 2 offices during the opening, business agenda and closing. Here is a possible setup shown on the screen. The main office would be occupied by the worshipful master, the senior and junior wardens, the immediate past master, the inner guard, and the secretary. But the worshipful master would also act as chaplain, the senior warden as senior deacon, the junior warden as junior deacon, the immediate past master as director of ceremonies, and the inner guard as tiler, making sure that they all talk to different people when they're carrying out their office and don't have to talk to each other. One of these brethren would need to be a key holder for the Masonic Hall, as no other individuals can be present. The meeting is carried out in 3 parts. In part 1, the lodge is formally opened by the officers. The regular formalities of minutes, elections, district reports, etc. are carried out. The lodge is then called off. Either the technical equipment for a video meeting is set up in the lodge room, or the officers adjourn to a convenient room where the equipment has already been set up. For this purpose, one of the brethren, who is not the worshipful master, needs to operate the equipment. So we need 2 additional officers. A Teams video meeting is convened for the purpose of delivering a Masonic lecture. All the members of the lodge who are not comfortable with attending a physical meeting are invited to take part, and they can also invite guests, as they would to a normal lodge. But this is not a public internet occasion, and only lodge members and their guests are allowed to attend. There's a dress code, at least to the waist, of white shirt, black or provincial tie, dark jacket with appropriate collars and jewels. The operation of the video equipment is organised by the resident techie, who is also an acting officer of the lodge on the night. A Wi-Fi connection is needed, which can be hardwired, or a 4 or 5G dongle as appropriate. The resident techie should arrange for the video and voice channels to be displayed in such a way that all the other officers can see the proceedings, and the worshipful master should be provided with video and voice transmit and receive facilities. The Teams video meeting is organised by an off-site Teams meeting convener, whose job is to set up the meeting, issue the invitations to a list previously provided by the secretary, by the resident techie, to start the meeting at the appropriate time as advised by the resident techie, to admit brethren on the list and confirm with them that they are taking part from a private environment and are the brother named on the invitation list. The virtual attendees will have been previously sent an email link to invite them to join and when they should connect. They will be admitted to a lobby to be formally admitted by the Teams meeting convener, so keeping the meeting secure. As the brethren join the meeting, their microphones will be muted, but they will be able to virtually raise their hands to ask questions at the appropriate time. The Teams meeting convener will ensure that any brethren arriving late are admitted in an unobtrusive manner. The presenter will have contacted the Teams meeting convener in good time before the formal start of the meeting, so they are both ready when the officers arrive at the Teams video meeting. Ideally, the physical lodge members should be the last to join the TVM. This will be organised between the Teams meeting convener and the resident techie. The WM formally opens the meeting and welcomes the virtual lodge members and their guests. He introduces the presenter, who will then deliver the lecture using PowerPoint and talking head camera as appropriate under the presenter's control. When the talk is complete, the presenter will take questions at the discretion of the worshipful master. Questions can be asked by a brother virtually raising their hand or being asked to text their name to ask a question, and the text will be seen by the worshipful master. The master can then invite the brother to put their question. The resident techie and the Teams meeting convener will then make sure that the cameras and mics of the worshipful master, presenter and questioner are live, and the worshipful master will introduce the questioner put their question, the presenter will answer it, and any subsidiary questions at the discretion of the worshipful master. Once the questions are complete, the presenter's camera and mic will be muted, and the worshipful master will take control of the meeting and formally close it, perhaps reporting on any important correspondence, which would be normally part of the risings, and saying some suitable closing words. The resident techie and the Teams meeting convener will then arrange that the meeting is closed tidily on the instructions of the master, and all brethren will be simultaneously logged off. For the third part of the meeting, the officers will return to the lodge room and call the lodge back on. They will then formally close the lodge and go home. So let's just review what we've looked at. The short-term survival tactics I suggest are: undertake a risk analysis survey, use secure podcasts to support masters and their lodges, adopt the use of tiled hybrid meetings to bring all members who can physically attend and those who are online together in the shared purpose of the lodge, and consider holding an outdoor meeting if this is allowed. So far, I have only talked about emergency measures to help lodges survive. These are tactical responses to the changing landscape of the COVID-19 threat. But as we've seen in previous pandemics, such as the Spanish flu of 1918 to 20 and the Asian flu of the late 1960s, we will in time either develop a treatment, a vaccine, or develop herd immunity. But in the particular processes of a disease which selectively attacks older people, we might lose much of our corporate knowledge and experience, and our meeting places might go bust. Meeting places can always be hired, so the potential loss of our Masonic halls, while sad and unpleasant, doesn't threaten the long-term survival of our order. We started out meeting in taverns, and we could do it again. But the loss of our corporate knowledge, which consists of secrets held in closed cells, is not so easily secured. The younger people, who will be best placed to continue the traditions of our order, may not yet have progressed through all the ranks of knowledge. In the worst case, just imagine if at the end of this pandemic, the only surviving Freemasons are newly made entered apprentices, and all the more senior members have either passed to the Grand Lodge above or resigned from their lodges in despair. We rely on their broad understanding of ritual and symbolism in order to pass, raise, and install brethren to take office in the lodge. We need to make sure that we enable younger brethren to take office and learn. If a number of lodges share a Masonic hall, perhaps that group should consider themselves as a whole. If the lodges have collected the risk assessment data I suggested earlier, then look at the whole Masonic population of the group. It may be that there are enough young, inexperienced brethren to fully officer a single lodge. Why not consider making them all honorary members of the oldest lodge in the group, so they can hold the physical part of the hybrid meeting, whilst inviting the more vulnerable older brethren to take part in a celebration of the new status of the candidate. Lodges of instruction can be held over secure video links to enable older brethren to pass on their knowledge to the younger brethren who can use it to good advantage. These young officers could then be dispensed to hold meetings on behalf of all the lodges in the group on a rotational basis to keep as many lodges as possible alive until they can be filled with new candidates. When we begin to come back together after this unprecedented period of exile from the social fellowship of our lodges, let us remember we are the temporary custodians of a wonderful tradition, and we have the responsibility to revive and reinstate the system we have been forced to mothball for so long, to pass it on to the next generation. What have I personally been doing to try and ensure the long-term survival of Freemasonry? I've done two things. I've begun to create a series of simple handbooks in conjunction with Lewis Masonic to assist inexperienced Master Masons to educate new brethren in the basics of our traditional ways. I've called the series the Masonic Tutors Handbooks, and Volume 1, The Duties of the Apprentice Master, was published in May of this year, 2 months after my lockdown started. I'm working on 3 further books to cover Fellowcraft, Master Mason, and Royal Arch Companion to complete the series. I've also added a support section for inexperienced Masonic tutors on my long-standing website, www.webofhiram.org, which I set up at Bradford University in 1999. And I've added some new sections during the enforced free time of lockdown. It's quite a comprehensive site nowadays. Have a look at it if you're not familiar with it. I've also added a link support website run by openlodge.com to provide questions and answers to help new Masonic tutors who may not have access to as much Masonic knowledge as we used to have. If you want to contact me, you can find me at robert@openlodge.com. So email me if you want to know more about podcasts, hybrid meetings, or any other things like my Masonic education portal. Thank you, Brother Barrett, for inviting me to address the newly formed Transoceanic Masonic Studies Society. And thank you, brethren, for listening.